Hello everyone, welcome to my devotional series of videos which are aimed at reading through Robert Alter's translation of the Old Testament. So here is the book. Robert Alter is a linguist and a scholar, and he has translated the Hebrew Bible, the Old Testament, into 3 volumes which are absolutely massive. So this is the first one, which covers the book of Moses, the first 5 books of the Old Testament. The rest of them are packed away here into this beautiful case, which the other one came from as well. These are colossal works, and the average page in this book has, a little tiny paragraph of biblical writing at the top and a huge raft of footnotes on the bottom. Now, I've been looking for some time for a new translation of the Old Testament and the New Testament. I'm still kind of on the hunt for that one. And what I'm most hoping for is a translation that gets to the voices of the original authors much more than the voice of modern readers, particularly Christian readers. The reason I want to do that is because sometimes when interpreters are laying claim to certain portions of the text, something's lost. And the original writers of the New Testament, for instance, were looking at the Old Testament and thinking, wow, now that I've met Jesus, I can see him on every page. Here he is, the Word in the beginning that God uses to create the universe. Here he is, he's the ark that everybody runs to and is saved from destruction. He's the child of the promise who is, the Father's hand is held above and slaughtered as the sacrifice in the place of Abraham and Isaac. So the writers of the New Testament were reading the Hebrew scriptures, the Old Testament, and what they were seeing was more than the Jewish original voices of the text. They were seeing their own interpretations, their own experience, the revealed Christ, and all the rest of the things that they have then brought to the text and written the New Testament. So I'm a student of the Bible, I'm a student of the Old Testament and the New Testament, and like Robert Alter, I believe that several of the translations that are out there have been slightly overcoloured by particularly Christian interpretation, and certain linguistic and stylistic choices that are made by interpreters are made theologically. So where there are several options, people will generally choose an option that favours their particular view. And if you want to learn more about that, this is stuff that's very widely available in scholarship. But what I'm mostly concerned with is the original voices of the authors. So I'm going to be reading Robert Alter's translation of the Old Testament, a chapter at a time. I'm going to read out his footnotes and give my reader response to them as a student of the Bible and of the Old Testament. So this is all new ground for me. I haven't kind of done loads of work on this before I've come and read it, so I'm going to have to try and think on the fly a little bit. So you're going to see a little bit of me, a little bit of Robert Alter in this video, and I hope that's what you see. So without further ado, let's get to his translation beginning in Genesis chapter 1, verse 1. When God began to create heaven and the earth was welter and waste, and darkness over the deep, and God's breath hovering over the waters, God said, "Let there be light." And there was light. And God saw the light, that it was good, and God divided the light from the darkness. And God called the light day, and the darkness he called night. And it was evening, and it was morning, the first day. And God said, "Let there be a vault in the midst of the waters, and let it divide water from water." And God made the vault, and it divided the water beneath the vault from the water above the vault, and so it was. And God called the vault heavens, and it was evening, and it was morning, the second day. And God said, "Let the waters under the heavens be gathered into one place, so that the dry land will appear." And so it was. And God called the dry land earth, and he called the gathering of waters the seas. And God saw that it was good. And God said, "Let the earth grow grass, plants yielding seed of each kind, and trees bearing fruit of each kind that has seed within it upon the earth." And so it was. And the earth put forth grass, plants yielding seed, and trees bearing fruit of every kind. And God saw that it was good. And it was evening, and it was morning, the third day. And then God said, "Let there be lights in the vault of the heavens, to divide the day from the night. And they shall be signs for the fixed times, and for days, and for years. And they shall be lights in the vault of the heavens, to light up the earth." And so it was. And God made the 2 great lights, the great light for dominion of the day, and small light for dominion of night, and the stars. And God placed them in the vault of the heavens to light up the earth, and to have dominion over day and night, and to divide the light from the darkness. And God saw that it was good. And it was evening, and it was morning, the fourth day. And God said, let the waters swarm with the swarm of living creatures, and let fowl fly over the earth across the vault of the heavens. And God created the great sea monsters, and every living creature that crawls, which the water had swarmed forth of each kind, and the winged fowl of each kind. And God saw that it was good. And God blessed them, saying, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the water in the seas, and let the fowl multiply in the earth. And it was morning, and it was evening, and it was morning, fifth day. And God said, let the earth bring forth living creatures of each kind, cattle and crawling things, and wild beasts of every kind. And so it was. And God made wild beasts of each kind, and cattle of every kind, and all crawling things on the ground of each kind. And God saw that it was good. And God said, let us make a human in our image, by our likeness, to hold sway over the fish of the sea, and the fowl of the heavens, and the cattle, and the wild beasts, and of all the crawling things that crawl upon the earth. And God created the human in his image. In the image of God he created him. Male and female he created them. And God blessed them. And God said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and conquer it, and hold sway over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the heavens, and every beast that crawls upon the earth. And God said, look, I have given you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the earth, and every tree that has fruit-bearing seed. Yours they will be for food. And to all the beasts of the earth, and to all the fowl of the heavens, and to all that crawl upon the earth, everything that has breath of life within it, the green plants for food. And so it was. And God saw all that he had done, and look, it was very good. And it was evening, and it was morning, the sixth day. So that is Genesis 1 verse 1, according to the translation by Robert Alter, and I like it. I like it straight away. One of the things I like about it straight away is how it uncovers the kind of poetic feel. If you want to, you can have a look up for videos of people reading this in Hebrew, and I think it's so beautiful. You know, it has a cadence to it, and a beauty and a symmetry to it as poetry, which is really, really striking in Hebrew. And sometimes modern translations, particularly Protestant modern translations, have so desired for the precision of the kind of quasi-scientific aspects to this to be shown that some of the poetry is lost. So over the past kind of couple of hundred years, the people who interpret these texts very literally have been falling out with the people who interpret these texts much more poetically. Now, Robert Alter is one of these guys who's going to say, you know, this is a creation myth. You know, this is a story, a poem to kind of speak in Bronze Age terms how the world came to be as it is. And that's fine. You know, that's obvious from his essays in the beginning of the book. It's obvious from some of his footnotes here, which we're going to go through one at a time. But definitely to the reader, the actual scientific events which brought this all into being are almost not particularly the focus of it. Certainly God's creativity, God's personality, if you can call it that, is present through the work of creation. And I think Robert Alter's translation demonstrates that really, really clearly. So, first of all, there was a really interesting language choice here. What was it? Chapter 1, verse 2. Where he said, verse 1, sorry, when God began to create the heaven and the earth was welter and waste. Welter and waste, he says, the Hebrew is tohu wabohu. It's a rhyming couplet that's there. And he says it occurs only here and in two later biblical texts which intentionally allude to this text. So pieces that refer back to the creation of the world. So tohu wabohu. So the second word of the pair looks like a nonsense term, he says, to rhyme with the first and reinforce it in effect that he's tried to approximate in English by alliteration. Tohu by itself means emptiness or futility, and in some contexts is associated with the trackless vacancy of the desert. Now, one of the reader reviews for this book, which I noticed, which I'll read to you actually, is no, I won't, because I can't find it right now. But one of the things they say is that this language translation is steeped in the water, not of New Testament Christian baptism, but in the life-giving water discovered by the people of the desert. So that was a kind of poetic review that I read. I can't remember the author. I'll find it for you sometime when I upload this. But the vacancy of the creation before God adds to it all of these things that he's decided is really, really clear. And I love the linguistic way that he represents that. And I do think that that's a very different cadence to how most Protestant translations have given it. Next footnote, he says that the days which are in this passage, that unusually the Hebrew uses a cardinal, not ordinal number. As with all the 6 days except the sixth, the expected definite article is omitted. So he is here giving some credence to the argument that these poetic representations of the creative work of God to kind of make the universe as it is intentionally vague. So he's saying the linguistic aspect of it is that the definite article is removed and the kind of poetic sense of day or days is left. So when we have each day where God creates the heavens and the earth, it's not over specified. Now, we can definitely fall out over that if you like. I mean, there are definitely people who are going to be watching this video and basically sharpening their knives to say, heresy, you know, this clearly demonstrates that God created the earth in 6 days, around about 6,000 years ago. I'm okay if that's how you're making your camp. That's all right. I don't mind. I've felt like that before and argued strongly for it before. At the moment, the way I see the whole of the Genesis creative account is the same way I see the whole of the act of the sacrifice of Christ on the cross. And by that, what I mean is that God is there. And 1 verse 1 shows us that when God began to create the heaven and the earth was welter and waste, and the darkness over the deep, and God's breath hovering over the waters, God said, let there be light. Now, he said it, and then it happened. So, certainly for God's creative work, the declaration in heaven for God to intentionally create the universe, the statement in heaven, the finality of the decision to create this thing is made, and the certainty with which it is implemented is also guaranteed. So that's our first point. So 1 verse 1 shows us that when God decides to do something, he will declare it in heaven, and it will certainly be done. Now, for a Christian, one of our most important and cherished beliefs is that when Jesus dies on a cross, a sacrifice is made, which is a sufficient payment for everybody who will ever come to God the Father through Jesus Christ. And so what we do is we say that on that day, as Messiah died, you know, as he lay bleeding and he's on the cross, giving up his spirit, there is a sort of transaction or a statement in heaven where God says, it is done. The payment is paid. The sacrifice is made. Everything is completed. You know, tetelestai, it is finished. So Jesus secures not only the word of the guarantee that the thing will work, but the certainty that the salvation will occur. So the writer of the Hebrews says that he is able to save to the uttermost everybody who comes to the Father through him. So the certainty of the implementation is guaranteed, and the certainty of the original statement from God's own creative personality is assured. But we weren't created then, were we? So my whole life was, you know, millennia into the future, and even when Jesus died, you know, the people in my island of Great Britain were painting themselves blue and chopping off each other's heads and running around kind of half savage. So when Jesus dies, it's not just to save civilized people in the Middle East in his own time, it's to implement something that will then be worked out gradually over the eons and over the centuries that are to follow. Now, I don't know if anybody in the first century kind of imagined how long that would be. You know, by the end of the New Testament, you've got strong references to people who were hoping and expecting the parousia, the return of Christ, to come really, really soon. So maybe no one imagined how long that would take, but the promise is secure because the statement is definite, and God's own expression of his nature through what he declares and then through what is implemented on the strength of that declaration is just as certain. So what I see in this translation by Robert Alter is a deliberate attempt to kind of represent that unfamiliar ambiguity of the original readers of Genesis and of the scriptures, the original hearers of this poetry, who were being told that not only was there a God whose creativity and personality are expressed in everything that is made, but who is able to state with definitive certainty that things will be made and then they shall be so, and that the end of that journey is not necessarily very close to the beginning of it. That whatever happens in between, the certainty is there and the definite statement of creativity is there. So some other footnotes then. He calls it a vault, what the King James Version calls a firmament. Most of the modern English translations will call it an expanse. We mean the skies. He deliberately says it's the heavens. It's God creates the heavens, the sky. He's sort of reconstructing that ancient view of what the world actually was, what the cosmos actually was. The idea that you've got the earth down here and you've got the heavens, and somewhere above the heavens you've got God. So he's representing that very, very deliberately, and I kind of like it. I think that makes sense in the terms of the original text. He says wild beasts in verse 24. So let the earth bring forth living creatures of each kind, cattle and crawling things, and wild beasts of every kind. I'm indebted to a guy in California who, I don't know if he'll ever see this, his name's Gary Hurd. He was the first person to kind of pitch it to me, that let the earth bring forth was a kind of scriptural foundation for what he called kind of biblical evolutionism. So people who are happy enough that scientific consensus about the age of the universe, the sort of evolutionary way that we got here, for instance, that could also be a faithful interpretation of the same Genesis text that literalists and fundamentalists and creationists would say is to be read as is. So let the earth bring forth is a suggestion, or it's a command from God for the earth to produce species. And I really like that. I kind of prefer it to the idea that God just sort of zapped them into existence. Do you know what I mean? The sense that, suddenly God made there be, here, there's a cat, or like, there's a dinosaur. I like it that he says, let the earth bring forth. Let the earth respond to my voice. Let my voice go out, my word go out. I mean, we'll pick that theme up later when we do some more New Testament studies, but let my word go out and let the created things respond and sort of give birth to wild beasts and tame animals and winged creatures and all that sort of thing. So he says, the phrase would mean beasts of the earth for wild beasts, but the archaic construct form for beasts of, heito, elsewhere regularly occurs in collocations that denote wild beasts. In verse 25, the archaic form is not used, but given the close proximity of hayat haaretz there to heito eretz here, it seems that the meaning is the same. I think this is probably a little too technical, and I think at this point I'm going to decide not to read every one of Robert Alter's footnotes behind, because I am no Hebrew scholar by any means. I can kind of be interested and be a fan of all the things that he's concluded here, but some of this more technical stuff I think we're going to have to just skip over. I am, however, going to read his notes on verse 26, which is about a human. So he says, the term Adam, afterward, consistently with a definite article which is used both here and in the second account of the origins of humankind. That's what he means by Genesis 2. He sort of backing up the popular consensus that both Genesis 1 and Genesis 2 are sort of parallel accounts of how people came to be, borrowed from two original Jewish Canaanite kind of traditions. I am not all the way persuaded on that one, and maybe we'll have to wait to hear from chapter 2 and read a little bit more to settle it for sure, but I get what he's saying. So, it is a generic term for human beings, not a proper noun. It also does not automatically suggest maleness, especially not without the prefix ben, i.e. son of. And so the traditional rendering, man, God creates a man, is misleading, and an exclusively male, Adam, would make nonsense of the last clause of verse 27, which is to say that male and female he created them. Now, I have listened to people who are possibly experiencing a psychotic delusion, who really believe that what God creates, the Adam he creates, is a hermaphrodite of some sorts, that the original human was both genders, both sexes, both kind of in one, and capable of, I guess, asexual reproduction. I cannot believe that is what is meant here in this text, and I don't think that Robert Alter is sort of suggesting that it is. What he's saying is that humanity is created in the image of God, and male and female is created. And the fact that you have one man there in chapter 2 does not preclude the statement here that God created human in his image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. So again, we've got this thing of the declaration in the heavens for God to say, let there be Adam, let there be a human. And within that you have all of the kind of corroborating pieces of the equation, which then result in a male and a female of the species, or humanity as a whole. So what he's saying is that the desire to be very technical about there being a man placed first and then the woman, he says it's not really fair to chapter 1 to put that in there, because that's a chapter 2 thing that we're introduced to later. So don't twist the meaning of this kind of poem of God's expression here. And God created the human in his image. In the image of God he created him, male and female created them. Don't make that carry all the stuff from chapter 2, because it's not in there. That's what he's saying. There's some more kind of very technical stuff which I'm not going to go into here. He talks about a lot of grammatical and anatomically specific things which I'm not going to kind of break into there. But my overall impression so far is that he is kind of it's almost like the equivalent of something that would be familiar to the readers of C.S. Lewis, really. Like, he's striding into the Wild West bar saloon and he's tipping over a load of drinks from people who are sat in there, and he's just daring you to kind of take him on certain things. It definitely carries that sense within his footnotes that he's kind of taking his gloves off and squaring up to a particular kind of reader and a particular school of thought within biblical interpretation, and especially Genesis interpretation. And I'm kind of up for that. I think that his attempt to kind of bear all and be faithful to the original construction of this text, which I think is the thing that he's definitely done the best. He's kind of picking a fight wherever there's a fight to be picked. And I think that's to his credit. This is an amazing scholar of language and linguistics. He's an amazing scholar of Hebrew. Certainly his life's work is well worthy of our best attentions. And while we may not agree with all of his conclusions or renderings of Hebrew, I've got no choice because I'm not a Hebrew scholar. I don't get to do that, really. We can still prefer the work of other scholars while kind of listening to him and hearing what his rendering of this text is. So I'm going to leave it there for today. That's chapter 1 of Genesis in Robert Alter's Hebrew Bible translation with commentary. So if you want to pick this up, it costs you about £60 in British money, I guess about $75. for the 3 volumes which come. They're really beautifully presented. The artwork is very cool. Kind of combines that sort of old school grand gilded gold kind of stuff with some quite nice modern artwork. You know, I like this. This is kind of neat. The second volume here, the prophets, is much more massive. Obviously, it's the largest section within the Hebrew Bible. And here, the writings. This one. Come on, that is cool, isn't it? I think these really are beautiful books, and they're definitely well worth a buy for anyone who's serious about reading and translating texts or understanding the original context of kind of sacred scripture and hearing a bit of a view from outfield. You know, this guy's not a traditional Bible interpreter. He's not a theologian particularly. He's a linguist, and so I'm up for this series, and I'm up for these documents. I'm up for kind of hearing the guy out on everything he has to say. So look for me another time, and I will see you then. Bye.